Welcome to another edition of Success Talk. This is Dr. Herbert Harris, and we give you talks each week with people who have achieved a lot of things, who've overcome challenges, and who've made breakthroughs. And today we have my good friend from Chief Bookman, Jonathan. Welcome to Success Talk.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure and an honor. Oh, let's see. Gary says there's an echo.
Okay. So there's an echo. Well, this is interesting. We're trying something new, folks, so let's see how it works. Let me see if there's anywhere. I don't know any way. There shouldn't be an echo. I mean, we're talking and all seems to be well. Well, let's see. I don't know why there would be an echo. It's an echo. It's even so positive vibrations. We still have an echo. It's manageable. Okay.
Yeah, it may be one of those.
All right. So
if I can turn on my headphones, I wonder if that would help.
That would probably do it.
Let's see if we'll do that. I'll try these.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
Let's see how that goes. Hey, Sade, we are making a breakthrough there. This is some new stuff here, and everybody who's on board you're now witnesses to this new transformation. How's that working? There's no echo now, correct? Let's see. Maybe you should talk, Jonathan. Can you hear me?
I think it's linking up. Give me just a second for it to.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Okay. Well, if it doesn't work, we'll turn off the Zoom. That's what Sade says, turn off the Zoom. So is that okay now? Do you hear any echo, Sade? Are we good? Let's see. Anybody else? Any echo? If I sing a song, can you tell me if I'm echoing? I think we're good, Jonathan. Okay. All right. So, as I said, this is Success Talk. And today, let's see, no echo on Jay. All good. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. I'll hop off here. Perfect.
No, you probably need the earphones. Okay. Yeah. All right, let's go forward.
But we should be okay. They can hear. I think we should be.
Okay, everybody seems to be happy.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Now, Jonathan, I've been so impressed with your book presence, your reading presence online. And it's so necessary for so many of our young people to really plug in and tune in to what's going on online. And reading is becoming a lost art. And so I guess my question is, what inspired you to start this whole book? I don't know if it's a book club, a book presence, a book reading. How would you characterize it?
Absolutely. I would characterize it as a movement to end illiteracy and change that dynamic that you just mentioned. So in 2014, and we may talk about this a little later, but in 2014, I was completely oblivious to the illiteracy crisis that was going on here in the States and around the world. So I was working in corporate and decided that I needed to make a change in my life and in my career, and was working in San Francisco. A friend of mine who received her PhD in literacy was telling me about how there's 2/3 of kids that don't have a single book in their home and the impact of not having books in their home. And that's when a vision came to me that was, I love books. And since 2015, I've been trying to push this thought out into the universe.
Well, I think this idea of the disappearance of books, and it's probably been complicated by the internet because, you really I won't say the internet is anti-book, but the internet really, I think, encourages people to read online, to read on their phones, and to read on their computer. So I don't know that that's helping the book module, because there's something about having a book in your hands
Mm-hmm.
and even writing in it. I mean, I write in books, when I was a kid. Now, I'll tell you a funny story. I grew up in the segregated South. And in those days, the black schools never got new books. So we always got books that had come from the white schools the year before. And so we always had books that had writing in them. And so our teachers always told us, don't write in books. Don't write in your books. And I think that stuck with me for a long time until I really became a real reader and realized that writing in books was just a way to help crystallize my thoughts and to help, when I go back over the material, to make sure I've learned it. So it's interesting that this whole book phenomenon now is, it may be a lost art. When you look at the way the technology is going, do you think that might happen?
I think that it will shift as technology tends to make the world shift. I think there was a time when folks believed that the calculator was going to destroy the ability for people to do math, and Uber was going to change everything in terms of cab services, and the list goes on and on. But technology in general is progression, and I think as humans we tend to adapt and adopt the new methods of doing things, and I think books will follow suit. So you hear people talking about Kindles and e-readers, as well as using Libby. So I'm listening to a book now on Libby, which is a free library audiobook app that I love. And I think we will see the shift into audio and digital, but I don't know that books and reading themselves itself will necessarily change. Uh, that said, I do think that the biggest challenge will be capturing and creating readers at a younger age. So with what's going on right now with different books being pulled from shelves, different books not being recommended, etc. I think that's what's going to be the biggest obstacle, and the biggest obstacle that I'm seeing in this literacy space in general is uh, raising real readers from a young age with all the distractions that we have.
Now, speak on that a little bit. You being very much in the center, especially, you might say, the black book genre.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your feelings about this movement in the school systems to eliminate, you might say, black literature from the reading, from the syllabus in many of the schools?
I think that it is based on a deep rooted fear
Mm.
that those who will acquire this knowledge will develop a level of compassion and empathy for Black people in this country that the general population may not have. So we
Mm.
saw back when Black Lives Matter was going on in 2020, at what I think is the height of the movement, we saw people express their compassion and love, and there was a lot of outreach for Black people in this country. And I think that is where the challenge comes in for those who want to things to remain the way that they are. So the effort to pull these stories out of the libraries, out of the schools, out of the school districts is, in my opinion, just based on a deep-seated fear,
Mm.
which leads to a hatred, which leads to controversy, etc. What
Wow.
I do think is very interesting, to wrap that point up, what I do think is interesting is how many people that the books don't necessarily represent. So we're talking about Black books in particulars. How many people who are not Black that are pushing for all books to be in schools? So I think there's folks on both sides of that thought process, but in general, I think that it is definitely a mistake and something we need to pay attention to at a much higher level than what we are right now.
Well, it's interesting, Jonathan. I was looking at the way it is done. I was looking at Florida and even here in North Carolina. You put two, you might say, apples and oranges together. So in North Carolina, they've coupled Black literature with sex education and LGBTQ issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so their rhetoric is, I don't want my children to be taught about sex when they're 7 years old in the first and
Right.
the second grade or third grade. And that may well be, I think that's a point that people need to look at, because it seems like parents at that point, when I was a kid, I didn't get sex education. And this,
Mm-hmm.
well, frankly, in my era, we never got sex education. It was a do-it-yourself program. It's a home study.
Yep. Yep.
That a sex education was probably the first self-study course, that ever came along. But by connecting up two things that different people may respond to, with the idea of really confusing, like people may say, well, I really don't want my kids to get sex education when they're 7 years old and 8 years old. And then to couple that with Black literature, so that,
Mm-hmm.
and that seems the way to push things through. So everybody will be talking about educating my kids at 6 years old, but a part of that whole bill, and it's so often done in politics, they say some bills are like 1,000 pages long, and most of the senators and congressmen never really read the doggone bills. And so they'll
Mm-hmm.
have stuff up in there that when they read it one day, like, man, I didn't know this was in here, but none of them want to acknowledge that. so, so,
Absolutely.
so when the bill comes out and it says something crazy, they go like, man, wow, but they go along with it, because otherwise you're going to acknowledge, like, I never read the bill and yet I voted on it as a representative of my people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jonathan, a little about your background. Where did you grow up, and your early life?
Absolutely. Before I give you that, I want to make a point on that last statement that you just said, in
Uh-huh.
case there are people who may be interested, because I think that's um, a great point that you just made. Most of the books that people are talking about, number one, they haven't read. There
Mm,
are over 1,500 banned books in the United States, and that's tripled over the last couple of years. So there's a concerted effort to take any book that doesn't fit one square, for the most part, one type of box and one demographic of people. So anything that differs from that is getting grouped in, as you were alluding to, they're getting grouped into this. But I've asked librarians, I've asked educators, and I've asked parents, and the reality is it is very, very unlikely, 99+% unlikely, that there are children's books talking about sex in itself.
yes.
There are very few books that have negative images of white people. There are very few books that have a negative image of what's happened in history, but it does have truth to it. So what's happened is there's just rhetoric, and you mentioned it earlier. There's just this political rhetoric, and it sparks that fear that I was just talking about. So now everyone's afraid, and when people are afraid, as you know, somebody that studied human psychology, they act different, they move differently than what they would if they were comfortable. So this is making people really uncomfortable, and I think it is a result of people not reading the books, they're not doing their own research, and they're taking a narrative and running with it. And if I know this and you know this, and a lot of the books that you see on my shelf, and obviously your book as well, if I know this and you know this, then the people who have power and the people who are in power also know it. So I wanted to make sure I made that point, because you nailed it in terms of how things are being grouped together, and they're not all the same cause or fight, but the lack of education and the misinformation that's going around is what's driving it.
Yes. And that's, when we see that happening, this is a good vein we're talking. When you look at countries that become, you might say, totalitarians, and
Mm-hmm.
like very often, in America, we really have lived in a democracy all of our lives, be it imperfect or, uh, but whatever it is, it is still a democracy. And
Hmm.
when you live in a totalitarian regime, that means that you don't really have a say in anything. You know, you know,
Absolutely.
we can vote on what we do not or do not vote, do not want. People can, debate on whether all the votes are counted and whether you got
Hmm.
out the vote, but still the framework is there. In a totalitarian system, there's really you don't really have any input. And so but what you'll find is they'll go through the election process.
Hmm. Hmm.
They'll make it look like an election, okay? But
Yeah.
everybody knows the outcome. When you kill your opponents, that's a clue that this may not be,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
and one of the first parts of that is to burn the books. Basically every totalitarian regime where somebody calls all the shots. And
Hmm.
as long as you stay in line with what the the dominant thought is, you're okay. Okay. But when you decide to have a thought for yourself, and one of the main ways to limit people's thoughts is to burn the books.
Hmm.
And so you look back historically in those countries where you have dictators and totalitarian rule, they systematically burn the books. And so, in a sense, that's what's beginning to happen in America.
Absolutely. And I've put out a few posts about banned books over the last couple of weeks. Two of those being, I think, important to what you just said. One is Fahrenheit 451, and the other is 1984. But if you go to an Animal Farm or Brave New World, these are all exactly what you're saying. They're previews to the reality that we're creating. But when you spark so much fear in people's hearts that leads to hatred, people aren't willing to listen. And I think the other part is that we believe, especially here in America, we believe that we're inherently just better than other people. We're smarter than other people. These things that we've read about in these dystopian universes, so to speak, we're too smart for that. And
Mhm.
that's exactly how power preys on its people, is by making them have an inflated sense of intelligence and ego, which is what I've observed in just the comments that I've received over the last couple of weeks. It's very fascinating to see how people think just through their questions and feedback.
Wow. Yeah. I
So
think
I know
that's
you
it.
were getting ready
Yeah.
to go in a different
No,
direction. I'll let you get back
no,
to it, but I
no,
just wanted to
no.
touch on
What
that.
you know what we do? We're gonna kind of double back around because I
Mhm.
do want our listeners to get a sense of who you are and your background because what you're doing is so unique. I mean, and there's some other brothers and sisters online. You know what? Thank God for the computer now.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it has its issues, but never before could we get together like we're doing right now in real time and discuss issues of importance. So tell a little about your background, how you started, how you got to where you are.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small city in southeast Kentucky, Hazard, Perry County, and I grew up with my two parents, my mother, my father, my brother, and my two sisters. So growing up in southeast Kentucky, it was always a dream to attend the University of Kentucky, which I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to complete both my undergraduate degree in marketing and management and then my master's in business administration. After my MBA, I went to a company called Procter and Gamble in Cincinnati, worked for P&G for 7.5 years or so. And then I moved out to the West Coast, living in San Francisco, working for McKesson. Also left McKesson, went to Big Heart Pet Brands, which was formerly Del Monte,
Mhm.
and left, started a business, worked on that for 3 years, ran out of my resources, had to go back into the corporate realm for a few years, and just most recently left my friends over at Amazon down in Georgia outside of Atlanta. So
Mm,
that's the corporate background, where I'm from, and hopefully gives an idea of my formal education versus
mhm.
the education we'll talk a little bit more about, which is the self work.
Well, and I appreciate that because very often, it's important. Sometimes we discount education, you
Mm-hmm.
know, but it's important to have education. It's not, it's a plus. Okay. So
Yeah, Yeah.
And many times that MBA, I was speaking with a fellow, and he was talking about. I was looking at his approach to business, and he was saying for a moment, he said, "Well, I told my kids that, they may not have to go and get an MBA and whatnot." And I asked him, I said, "Well, but based on how your approach to business, do you think that MBA was helpful?" And he backed up
Mm.
for a minute. He said, it was. I say, because I don't have an MBA. I'm in law and philosophy and religion, but I know that if I understood business systems better, then becoming an entrepreneur can be a different experience. And so, and once he said, yeah, that's a good point, because so I salute you, for having been in the education arena and then come out as an entrepreneur. What was your biggest challenge when you were making that break?
The skills I thought would transfer did not transfer directly into entrepreneurship.
Mm,
So I've been what most would label, and myself included, fortunate enough to be successful on paper most of my life. Great grades, captain, leaders, all of those things. And then I got into corporate. I've had a thriving career in finance. Then when I left to go on my own, I realized that I did not know what it meant to be an entrepreneur. I was
mm,
very ignorant of what that process would look like, and I made the wrong assumption that I knew what I was doing before. It was a little unique because a lot of people will moonlight, so they'll work their job and also start a business at the same time. So it gives them a little bit more of freedom to be creative without worrying about having to make money immediately. But I was at a crossroad where I was in San Francisco. I knew that if I was moving back to Kentucky, I did not want to go to I didn't want to go to another company here in Louisville where I was moving back to. And I just decided to jump. I figure if I can go full time for as long as I can, I'll learn the lessons that much quicker, which is exactly what happened. I was independent for 3 years before I went back. So just learning the lessons, and that's definitely was the biggest challenge, and still continues to be a challenge in its own way, because I think like an analyst still, a lot of me thinks in an analytical way, which is great on one hand. But as you know, the most important component of being an entrepreneur is taking consistent, massive action. And so
mm,
sometimes I get that analysis paralysis in my head and I don't
mm,
make moves as quickly as I should. And
mhm,
I'm still working on that. But that's definitely the biggest challenge that I've had since leaving.
mm, mm. Now that's very honest. That's I love that, because people need to know that. It's like this is the real deal. Yeah. Now, what type
Absolutely.
of business did you go into, that first business?
It was called Servanta, and I originally wanted to partner nonprofits with socially conscious businesses. So think of it as cause marketing. If you got a nonprofit that focuses on houselessness or um, uh, getting people fed that are in the streets, so to speak, I wanted to take that nonprofit and say, hey, I will partner you with this business that also has a social cause. And we would run campaigns, raise money so that the business gets the benefit of the social equity and then the nonprofit gets the fiscal benefit.
Mm,
And I realized I did not have the skill set for that, and it was going to take me a little too long. And maybe after a year, that's when I heard about the illiteracy crisis and the fact that kids didn't have books. I also heard at that time about a company called Tom's and Warby Parker that were social enterprises. So they were businesses, but they used their profit to do good. And that was really the seed that planted the idea of creating a business that literally just is based on um, a social need versus just a business that's for profit in itself.
mm. Well, there's a concept where they call it the benevolent ruler,
Mm,
or even I think the benevolent despot. In other words, a dictator who
mhm.
works for good.
Interesting.
Okay.
Interesting. Hmm.
Yeah. So most dictators work for profit or power or even pleasure. Okay.
Mhm.
But the benevolent despot, the dictator who works for good, who has a vision and works for good. Um, I guess if you thought about who might be close when Gandhi was really pulling his whole movement together, he was kind of that person. Like Gandhi never really became a government. He was almost like a spiritual leader who got votes.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
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 Okay. And but then the negative mind, what happened to him. So
Mhm.
so it seems that when you have a good intention, that desire to really make positive change in the world, and you couple it with a business, framework, great things can be done. I mean, you look at the Bill and Melinda Gates nonprofit. I mean, great things can be done. So I take my hat off to you because somebody's got to do it.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been a fascinating journey. I never thought growing up in the hollers, as we would call them, of Southeast Kentucky, that this would be my life. My goal, excuse me, my initial goal was met before I turned 30. So I think there's a book titled The Second Mountain by David Brooks. I'm a big fan of it. It's essentially you climb up this mountain, you get to the top of it, you realize this isn't what I want to do. The view
Mhm.
is nice, but I don't want to stay here forever. So you've got to go back down the mountain and then figure out what you want to actually climb. And that's really been the story of my journey. I wanted to get into corporate. I wanted to make six figures. I wanted to have a nice home, a nice car. Just by growing up without a lie, I thought those things would make me happy. That's a lot of the imagery that I was seeing and the speak that I would hear when I was younger. But what I realized is those things genuinely don't. It's a cliche. Money doesn't make you happy. I think it gives you resources for sure, but I think fulfillment is more important. And you talk about purpose in your book. And I think a lot of the self-development books talk about having a chief definite aim or something that is bigger than just the stuff. And I've lived that, so I can definitely testify that that's 100% accurate.
Wow. When you look back as you were making that transition, what do you think was your biggest obstacle?
Kind of mentioned it before, but I believe the biggest obstacle was, or I'll say two things. Number one, figuring it out and having jumped off the ledge and waiting for the parachute to open. As Steve Harvey would put it, I didn't know that I didn't know what I was doing. That's the
Right.
first thing.
Yeah.
And then the second was maintaining the faith while I was going through the process. I think we hear the word faith, and I grew up a son of a preacher, so I've heard most of the the quotes from the Bible. I've read quite a bit of it, but you hear faith often, but you don't see it demonstrated. So the people around me who loved me, they saw me struggling as I was trying to figure it out, and they wanted me to take a different course of action. So to stick with it and to really believe in the vision despite the circumstances is I would say those two things were the biggest obstacles. And on the flip side, I would say that last part, sticking with it and maintaining the faith and having the courage to continue to go is also my biggest win in the whole process as well.
Wow. Yeah. They when when people make that transformation from like a corporate structured environment where somebody's telling you what to do, when to do, and how to do it. Did you ever feel that that type of system sort of limits your distractions?
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you come to work, you sit there at that desk. There's not too many things you can do that won't get you fired. you know, so when you become an entrepreneur, how do you handle distractions? Yeah.
I think time management. So managing time is the one of the harder things to do as you're getting started because you've got all of this excess time now. I didn't realize how much time 24 hours is in a day because to your point, most of my career I'm working for 10 of it. I'm driving in, I'm driving back home. you've got a large portion of your day that's already mandated. But when that goes away and it's just you and your time, it is very easy to become distracted, and it's very easy to mismanage your time. So having a calendar is I think extremely important. And then reading, obviously I read a lot, so that allows me to get centered, which is the third thing. So being able to meditate, take time and focus and recenter. And then just a bonus would be being honest with myself. I think one of the challenges too that we have as humans in this world is there's so many facades, there's so much of a desire to be fake and be accepted. And if, for lack of better words, being honest with yourself is vital in this process, especially if you're transitioning to becoming an entrepreneur. If I'm being lazy, I'll tell myself I'm being lazy. If I'm
Mm,
not doing the right things, I'll tell myself I'm not doing the right things. And I think that's very important in managing the distractions, is being honest and saying I'm distracted. What do I need to do to get back on track?
wow. That's a really, I was thinking back, one of our products, we have our success toolbox. And one of
Mm,
the portions that we had, the home study course, and there's a whole section devoted to be honest with yourself, face the facts. Because
mhm.
if you're not honest with yourself, if you're not really clear on where you are, who you are, what you're about, it's like having a GPS where the location is off. You're trying to get a
Mm.
destination and the location is off. Yeah,
Oh, that's good.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So that's
I
yeah, yeah.
I would say that part of that comes from my upbringing and being told things that I didn't necessarily want to hear, but they were true. But I
Mhm,
think a lot of that comes from the corporate world and being in finance in particular. So
mhm.
in my job, when I was 23, I was managing $500 million for P&G. If I missed my forecast, I didn't have an option of going and making something up. The goal was to figure out, why did this happen, and then reconcile what I thought was going to happen versus what actually occurred. And I didn't know it then, but in retrospect, I think a lot of my foundation on the ability to be honest with myself, excuse me, without taking it personal, came from someone asking me, "You missed your forecast." And it's not like I'm the only person that can see it,
Yeah.
everybody can see it.
Mm,
So the focus though was never on demonizing the person, myself included as a forecaster. The purpose was to understand what happened and then figure out what we need to do in the future. So, and I've just made a post about this earlier today, I believe. And one of the benefits of being in finance was that self honesty, but just honesty and objective thinking in general. When I look at things, I just see it for what it is versus what I want it to be. And I think that's a skill I didn't realize was as valuable as I'm seeing that it is now.
wow. Well, you just laid out something very, very powerful because, you know, thank goodness you achieved a certain level. There are a lot of people, you know, I'm a network marketer and an entrepreneur. I've always been a network marketer. And, when people come in, they say, well, I was in corporate America, and everybody,
Mm.
they love that term. I was in corporate America and then I decided to become an entrepreneur. Well, most people in corporate America just had a job, that just dressing it
Sure,
up. But as
sure.
you but as you were talking about forecasts and being responsible for delivering,
Mhm.
being responsible for results, and then when those results don't come, you can't hide it. There's no way like I'm 100 million short. It's like let me take it out of my account and put it in there to make up the difference. You can't do that. Yeah. So that's a real, and that's another level. And very few brothers, I think, get to that level or sisters.
Yeah, I was just telling my mother this the other day. I didn't realize how different it was because everybody around me was doing the same thing.
Hmm.
Everyone around me was class presidents and captains and valedictorians. Everyone is from MIT, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia.
Mhm.
they're from all of these elite schools. Everyone's thinking at a high level. So I was in a bubble for the majority of my adult life, especially those first 10 years of my career. And
Mhm.
then I left, and then I see it now and I think, oh, this was not normal. It was not normal for a 23-year-old just turned 23 to manage $500 million, or at 27, 28 years old, manage $3 billion when I was working in San Francisco. So I'm very privileged. I'm very fortunate. I did not realize it at the time, but uh, I'm extremely grateful. It set me up for what I think was going to be a successful career and successful life.
Mm. Jonathan, I once had a contract with was it Lucent Technology, and very interesting thing happened. They had an initiative to get black engineers and black scientists, working for the company. And they, over a period of, I guess, 5 years or so, a question arose. Many of the black engineers did not want to rise up in the company. So many of them never got to your level. Okay. And they could not understand that, that corporate mindset. You're supposed to always want to rise to the top, and
Hmm.
you rise as high as you can. Then once you figure that you've reached your pinnacle, then you decide who to follow. you know,
Hmm.
who to be beholden to, and so they can cover your butt. The When you were at that corporate level, did you want to rise up, become CEO, or move up the corporate ladder?
Uh, at first, I thought I would, because I thought that was the natural progression. But
Mhm.
I had a very important conversation with my manager within the first 18 months of my career. And she was telling me, when you cross over this threshold, at that time it was a band four, and we'll go band four and higher.
Yeah.
When you cross over this threshold, you essentially make an exchange with the company. They say, we will take care of you financially for the rest of your life, and you will do as we say do. If that means if we need someone in your position with your skill set to move to Asia next week, then you pick up and move to Asia next week. And it's not up for discussion. It's understood on both sides that that's the price that you have to pay. And when I had that conversation, I was coming up on 25 years old or so. I made a decision, that's not what I want to do. I was making more money than my parents combined when I
Mhm.
was 23, 24, 25 years old. Uh, and so it wasn't about the money. I started realizing it's not about the money, it's just excess at this point. But my time, on the other hand, I'm not willing to give my time. And I think in general, you were mentioning the engineers, and I think in with black people, and this obviously is not for all black people or all humans in general, but one of the things I noticed, I think there's two different trains of thoughts. One is either I don't want to do it, so that was mine. I just didn't want to do it. I knew that I could if I wanted to, but I wasn't willing to pay the price that they were asking for the benefit that they were giving. And I think the other mindset is there's a there's an imposter syndrome. I don't believe that I belong here. And it may be very deep in the subconscious,
Mhm.
but I think that's really those two reasons are the primary reasons, in my opinion, as to why we don't choose to rise up. And you can see it across the board with the limited number of black people in executive positions, which has changed recently because of everything that's been going on. But historically, that we haven't held those positions. And if I can project myself into the future and think, what would it have been if I would have been a vice president of finance, but I'm around people who are not like me, and I'm spending so much time here, does that make sense for me? So personal decision for me, but I think it varies for every individual. That's kind of what I've seen in the process.
But that's really an interesting analysis, and you're so right. I've seen, over the years, as I've counseled and mentored people, that was a profound realization. One of
Mm-hmm.
my one associate, I think they sent him to Mexico for like 6 months. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and then he came back. I think he had well, he'd been up in the Michigan area with this company and gotten to a high level, like you say, 6 figures and heading north, you know, and then they moved him to Atlanta. He moved from Michigan, I think, to like Kansas or somewhere, and then Atlanta. Once he got to Atlanta, making that kind of money as a black man, as a black family in Atlanta, like he was at the top of the food chain there. That big house. Then they sent him down to Mexico for about 6 months. And then they posed a question to him. They said, just exactly what you said. They said, we want you to relocate to Mexico. Now, he'd been with the company 20, 25 years. And, when he talked it over with his wife, and Atlanta, for a black person, Atlanta is about as close to heaven as you can get without dying. So,
Right.
Atlanta, I mean, when you go to Atlanta and you see black businesses everywhere, I mean, it's just, and people doing good, smelling good, like, whoa. And his wife was like, ain't no way I'm leaving Atlanta, to go to Mexico. Nothing against Mexico, but my kids are in school here and everything is going good. And I remember we talked, and I said, well, if you don't take that position, they're gonna get rid of you.
Yeah.
And he did not believe it. I've been and so
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
get it.
he didn't believe it. And within 2 years, he got an opportunity. Reverend Ike, I worked for Reverend Ike, and Reverend Ike didn't fire people. He
Mm.
said, I will give you an opportunity for greatness elsewhere.
It's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, you almost walk out like, wow, thanks, Reverend. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, ATL, yes, yes, yes. Someone. So, um, when he didn't go, they got rid of him. And it was such a soft glove thing. When they put you on that sliding scale, you don't even realize you're sliding until one day you look around, you're out the door. But the thing he didn't realize, that once you make that deal in the corporate America, in the corporate world, that's a lifetime deal.
Yeah, and I think it's just I think life is a big decision tree,
Uh-huh.
and that's why it's so important to have your personal values and what matters to you. I had experienced, and I mentioned this at least a time or two before, but I really want to hone in. I lived the dream before I was 30 years old. I
Mhm.
had a convertible on the East Coast with a condo downtown on the water. I was making more money than I needed. I don't have a family, it's just me. And
Uh-huh.
I realized this isn't it. Like, this
Yeah.
is a lot of stuff, and it's nice and I'm grateful. I never take it for granted at all. But if I think about the next 30 years of my life, is this what I want to do? And the answer was no. And I knew I would have automatically been wealthy if I would have went that route.
Mm.
I had a financial advisor tell me I would be worth 4.5 million without investing any money just off of my P&G stock alone.
Uh-huh.
And that's very tempting until you get it. And once you have it, it becomes, does a bigger house matter to me? Or does time freedom matter to me? Does a nicer
Mm.
car matter to me? Or does time freedom matter to me? And I've just chosen time freedom and the ability to pursue my purpose and why I believe that I was born into this world. The rest of it will come on the back end of all the work.
Well, as you were talking, I think purpose freedom.
Yeah,
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 absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
That's a
purpose
fact.
freedom. Yeah. Wow. Well, and I appreciate the work that you've done, with the 12 Universal Laws of Success. I'm amazed, we've sold large numbers to different corporations, especially realty companies.
Mm,
And I guess many of the companies realize that the stronger the person, the more clear the person is, the more capable they are of being successful. How did you first encounter the 12 Universal Laws of Success?
my brother Gary, I don't know if he's still on or not. Black Man with Books. He put me on maybe a year and a half ago,
Uh-huh.
and at that time I was in my self development super journey. I was going. super tough with reading and educating myself and really rewiring my brain. And then I had found you on Instagram as well. So love the book and love what he was saying about the book before I even got it, and read it, really enjoyed it, at least read it twice, maybe three times, but great read. And I want to give a shout out to Gary for putting me on to the book.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I think that's kind of the way most word of mouth is kind of one of those books that sort of come to you that moment you need it. It's like,
For sure.
yeah, when it shows up, it's like you need it. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And what I really enjoy outside of it being written by you and you as a Black man is the practicality of it. I think a lot of time when people think of esoteric principles or mindset or neurology in your brain, etc., it's made into these complex principles and out there kind of thinking. This is
Mhm.
beautifully written. Matter of fact,
Mm.
I'm probably going to read it again within the next few months so I get my cue down. But there are some books on my shelf that I wouldn't want to read a second time. It's just too technical. And I think the beauty of what you've done is made it very practical, intelligently written, and applicable for anybody, really.
Wow. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Was there any one portion that really stood out to you?
Purpose, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's where the book starts out with is purpose. And I was talking about that a little earlier, um, about how when I was first in consciousness, yeah, that as
Mhm.
well. So when I first started my journey, I didn't know myself. I had to learn myself. And when I was in Cali, I didn't mention this earlier, but the catalyst that changed everything was leaving my Oakland Hills home, going into San Francisco. If you're familiar with Financial District, Market Street is a lot of our homeless brothers and sisters that are there. And after a while, I couldn't stand myself because I'm walking by as though these aren't human beings, and I realized I was part of the problem. So I
Mm.
went to go find my purpose. And when I think about this book and how it breaks that down, and then from your purpose, from a vision that you have, the steps that you go, I've kind of lived it, which is what I think is the most important element to me.
Wow. Well, I love San Francisco. One of my good friends, Cecil Brown, teaches at Berkeley. I don't know if you've ever met Cecil.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I have not, but I'm
yeah,
familiar with Berkeley.
yeah. Cecil wrote "Which Way Is Up." He was one of the writers. He worked with Richard Pryor,
Oh,
and
okay, okay.
yeah, and he wrote a number of books. But he's a professor. What is his doctorate in African American folklore? So he spent a lot of time going back into like stories like Stagger Lee. Remember the old song "Stagger Lee shot Billy"? That might be before
Oh,
your time.
it might be just
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit
You
before.
have to call your mama from that. She'll tell you about Stagger
Fair
Lee.
enough.
Yeah, yeah. And but he did his thesis and really an expert on African American folklore. Studying many black writers. There were black poets up in the Durham area that were I mean, a poet, a black man that had like a photographic memory, and he wrote very profound poems like off the top of his head. And yeah, I'm gonna get you that. I think that'd be something you'd like to look into. I mean, just phenomenal. And I mean, white people came and they paid him and gave him a pittance, and he could create anything, man.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, yeah. So as you look back, one, I think you have a great perspective, and like you've arrived at a point in your life now where you're doing good, you're bringing light. If you look back, what advice would you give your younger self? Back when you were just starting out and starting to make the big money, looking at where you are now,
Mhm.
what advice would you give your younger self?
Identify your gifts,
Mm,
and your gifts will lead you to the lifestyle and the life that you want. And that is 100% not the way that I went. I went the complete opposite. I never thought I'd work in finance at all. but I think that that's what I would give myself, and could have went a few different directions, but I think in general for people, we all have a gift. We have something that we innately do that's just great. And especially in today's world, you can monetize and make money from anything. There are people who bake on the internet that make a lot of money. Keith Lee, if you haven't heard of him, he's a TikTok influencer now, 10 million plus followers, and he does food reviews. He eats food. He helps local restaurants grow, gives his honest opinion, and now he's getting the payoff from eating food. So follow whatever your gift is, identify it, or your gifts are, identify it, and then go to work on those things, and the lifestyle will come.
Wow. That is, so many of our young, and, I have to say, I'm one of those people that have so many gifts that you can't figure out which one, which one to do.
Yeah,
You have to work with at a time. So that was like profound for our young people then. And for those of us, it's never too late to make a new start.
absolutely. That's a great point, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's all mindset, and again, going back to the book, it's all what's in your mind. Whatever you believe is the reality, and you can create your own reality.
Mm,
And it's just intention. You mentioned that word earlier. Um, Intention and attention are the keys.
yeah.
Wherever your energy, wherever your focus goes is where your energy goes. So, uh, yeah, it's never too late. Always an opportunity, but certainly the point that you made, having too many gifts, I think that's a hard position to be in, but
Yeah.
over time you figure it out.
Yeah. It just takes you longer to figure it out, but
Mhm.
you hang in there, you eventually do it. If you look down the line now, you're at a certain point now. So right now your mission is to really foster and promote reading. Um,
Mhm.
if you look down the line 25, 30 years at your older self,
Mhm.
then what advice would your older self give your present self right now?
That's good. Older self. Number one, keep going.
Mm,
It's real. It
mhm,
happens. Have faith. Keep believing,
mhm.
and stay focused. I think that's the biggest challenge that I have now, is just continuing even as things are happening,
Yes.
but it's not happening at the speed that I would love for it to happen, which is now. But I understand it's a process. So my older self, I think, would just be patient.
Mm,
It happens in the future. It's real.
yes.
Just be patient.
Just be patient. Wow. Well, I tell you, Jonathan, as you were talking, I think you and I and Gary, we need to do a Instagram live. Now something I learned tonight, it's hard to do two things at one time. I think we did a yeoman's job of it. And those of you on Instagram, thank you so much. I see we're getting some love from the group. So this was an experiment, and you are a part of it, whether you like it or not. You're in the, you're,
Yeah, thank
you're in the
y'all.
middle of it. So we thank you for being here. So we were doing an Instagram and a Zoom at the same time. About the only thing we could have added was then be broadcasting the Zoom on Facebook and YouTube, and that would just
Mm,
be outrageous. But I'm thinking in the future on Instagram, I'd love for me, you, and Gary to get together and do a couple of Instagram lives, and invite our folks, because I think it's very. I enjoy talking to a person who has done it, in
mhm.
it, and still doing it. There's some people that have done it, but they're no longer in it. They done it, and then they can hit a rock and throw in the towel. There's some
Yeah.
people who are in it, but they don't continue doing it. So you've done it,
Mm,
you're in it, and you keep on doing it. And so I think we need to get together and have some discussions like that. Just looking at some of the people who joined us tonight, I think that this type of discussion can really stimulate, and the type of it's like James Baldwin, Baldwin was in Harlem one night at a place called Wells. There was a
Mm.
132nd and 7th Avenue was a club called Wells, and it was right next door to Count Basie's club. And up inside Wells, you had a bar. I mean, it was like something out of Harlem Nights. Okay.
Okay, indeed.
And that particular night, James Baldwin was there. There was a Calvin Lockhart, who was an actor, very handsome black man, an actor. He's dead now, but I mean, this guy was so handsome, man. Like men were going to kiss him. I mean, he was just handsome. He was a handsome guy, and women would attack. I mean, Calvin was something. But anyway, Baldwin's in there, and he had a cigarette, and there were a number of I tell you who else was there. I think it was Woody Strode, another actor, and and all we were doing was just sitting there listening. And man, Baldwin was smoking. And he was talking about the world and how he saw stuff in his books, and you know, I mean, he was dropping them. And I think we need to do something like that on Instagram.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Sign me up. I'm there. And I appreciate the opportunity. It's very cool for me. Again, I never thought that I would be having this conversation with an author about a book that I genuinely love. This is again part of the dream. It's happening. So thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, my brother. Any closing thoughts you'd like to share with all of our audiences and those who will listen to this in the future?
Have faith in yourself, have faith in your vision, and keep going. The marathon continues forever. So keep going, whatever it is. It was your vision was meant for you. It's custom made. Believe in it, follow it, nourish it, nurture it, and it all happens in time.
Woo! Wow. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for being a party and a part of this today. Um, I'll tell you something. It is so good for us, for people of color, for folks like us to come together and share and talk. And I treasure those days when we used to sit around. You remember Dr. Ben? You've probably heard of Dr. Ben, the Black Egyptologist.
Mm,
Yes.
I'm not familiar, but educate me,
Yeah, yeah.
please.
Dr. Ben Yohanan.
Okay.
And he was an early black publisher. Dr. Ben had a bookstore in Harlem, and it was called Al Kabulan. Al Kabulan. And he sold the old J.A. Rogers books, you know, many of the black books that you couldn't get anywhere else.
Okay.
And so he was an Egyptologist. And when I went to Egypt, he took me, and we were there for almost a month, and he was teaching. And we were in the mornings, man, we would go and see the antiquities. We'd go to Abu Simbel, or we'd go to Cairo, uh, all of the different temples. Many of them now are underwater because once they built the Aswan Dam, some of the antiquities we had to go to by boat. So I'm now, this years later, I'm sure they're underwater now.
Wow.
The Valley of
Wow.
the, yes, the Valley of the Kings, the temple, when you go to Abydos, the temple, and you see the zodiac sign that we've been talking about for years is up there in the temple. uh,
Wow.
or you go and look at the pharaonic listing where, you know, we make a big deal about America. We're what, 300 years old, 250 years
Mhm.
old? But here you have proof that the Egyptians, a consistent line of pharaohs for 2,500 years,
Mm.
where their name, their birth name, and their pharaonic name is carved into the wall. You know,
Good.
yeah,
Dr. Ben, got it.
Dr.
Yeah.
Ben, yeah, Dr. Ben. And so when those guys would talk, man, we'd travel in the morning, and in the afternoon it's very hot there. And after we would always go around Christmas time, which is hot as summer in the southern hemisphere.
Mhm.
And man, we spend the afternoon, and he'd be holding court. And man, you better have a pen, a tape recorder, and and an open mind, because
Mhm.
you know, just to be there to listen. And I think that's something. I think if we start doing this as men and women, you know,
Mhm.
who are conscious, that we need to start doing some of these things online, and I think once you get young people's interest and they start listening and they go like, wow, I didn't know that. And that can rekindle something completely new.
Great point.
All right.
Absolutely love it. Thank you for that. Now I got some research to go do.
Yeah, Dr. Ben. Well, folks, Jonathan, thank you so much. This has been an interesting edition of Success Talk. All of you who joined us today, thank you so much. Remember this, that you can be what you want to be, you can do what you want to do, and you can have anything you desire, always knowing that the best is yet to come. And so it is. Thank you, my brother. By the way, what is your website? Let me make sure to get that in there.
Thank you. Yeah, ilovebooks.org.
.org.
ilovebooks.org.
Okay, ilovebooks.org. All right, folks, you heard it directly from the man's mouth. Have a great, magnificent day, everyone. See you for another edition of Success Talk. So it is.